It is the 139th episode of Common Knowledge, the show where I take a look at 10 common Magic the Gathering cards and tell you, are they any good in the Pauper format or not? We will start with our first card. It is Forfend. Forfend is 1 and a white for an instant. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to creatures this turn. Interesting. It's a fog that doesn't quite fog. White already has a couple of fogs in that I believe are Pauper playable. Ethereal Haze at the very least is common, so that one's just better. But preventing all damage that would be dealt to creatures this turn, I guess, in some ways this is a slightly different card. Because if you're in like a go wide white weenie kind of deck, you can block all your opponent's creatures and you can play this, and it kind of works like a fog, but you have to have the creatures for it. But also, if your opponent plays a breath weapon and thinks they're going to wipe the whole board, and you play this, it prevents the board wipe from happening. And most of the board wipes that we see in Pauper are either red or black, and those will pump, or the red ones will all do direct damage, the fiery cannonades and the breath weapons. Now this isn't going to do anything when it comes to the Arms of Adar or the sulfurous, I forgot what it's called, but the one of them gives -1/-1 to all the creatures, and one of them gives -2/-2 to all the creatures. I think Arms is just to your opponent's creatures, and this won't stop that, because those aren't damage, but it will stop the fiery cannonades and the breath weapons, or the festivities, or lots of things like that, the electricaries. And so that's an interesting way. Maybe it's even something you keep in a sideboard of white weenie, and when you know you're going up against red decks that are going to use those forms of board wipes, maybe you sideboard this in to stop that. Maybe. But when you think of it as just a fog effect, it's a really bad fog effect. So I'm kind of in the middle. I thought this was a terrible card, and I thought about it a little bit more, and now I'm kind of coming around on it to just as a normalish mediocre card. I'm going to give it a 3.5 because I do feel like I've considered some interesting ideas with it, but generally probably not an amazing card. Next up is Silent Dart, single generic mana for an artifact. And you can pay 4, tap, and sacrifice this artifact to deal 3 damage to target creature. I don't love this. I don't. 3 damage is not a ton of damage, and you're having to spend 5 mana total for this. 1 to get it down, and 4 for the effect. We've talked about Tron decks before, and Universal Solvent and some of those cards that will come down early, and then once you have big piles of generic mana, which Tron decks can give you, those can work out. But those destroy permanents, and this does a little bit of damage to just creatures. That's not great. And it's also pretty easy to just, an opponent can take this off the table before it really does anything, and that's going to feel real bad too. It's a cheap artifact that you can play early. Maybe that helps your affinity for artifacts count for your refurbished familiar or something like that. But we have so many other cards that are just better artifacts to fill those slots. You don't need to play Silent Dart. I will give this a 2. I think it's pretty bad. What do we have next? Dusk Charger, 3 and a black for a 3/3 horse. With Ascend, if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. This creature gets +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing. I believe this is our first Ascend card that we've talked about on the channel. And Ascend is not too bad. It ends up being one of those kinds of effects that you get in the mid to late game, because it counts your lands too. So as long as you're making land drops and putting some stuff on the table, it's pretty easy to put stuff on the table in Pauper. Whether it's a blood fountain that puts down an artifact that is an artifact and puts down a blood token, so that counts as a second permanent here. I think it's pretty easy to get to 10 permanents in Pauper, especially because removal is around, but a little less so. I think people just kind of let the value engines happen in Pauper because they are also trying to make value engines. So Ascend is an effect that I think could probably be really well used in Pauper. Now, is this card good enough for it? No, not really. A 4-mana 3/3 is bad. A 4-mana 5/5 is not terrible, but it still doesn't have any form of evasion. I think you're going to feel really bad if you've assembled 10 permanents just so this thing can be a little less bad. Although I will say, if you're building the deck that uses Ascend, once you have 4 mana, you probably already have a way of getting 10 permanents, or maybe this is your 10th permanent. And so maybe you're more or less guaranteeing that you will have a 4 mana 5/5. Even then, I think you'd probably just play your Gurmag Anglers instead. That's a 5/5 that you can get out potentially even earlier than this because you're just delving for it, and that's just a more effective way altogether. I believe. I will end up giving this a 2.7. Hunting Drake is 4 and a blue for a 2/2 Drake with flying, and when this creature enters, you put target red or green creature on top of its owner's library. That's interesting. That is interesting. So a good form of tempo. It's a color hoser for 2 different colors, which we don't always see with color hosers. Usually they're hosing just one color. So for this to have 2 options does give it a little bit more flexibility. Now, it is 5 mana for a 2/2 flyer, and that is pretty bad. But, are you going to play this in your sideboard when you play against, a Gruul ramp deck? No, still probably no. As the problem with Gruul ramp decks is that they're playing Cascade creatures. They're playing Annoyed Altasaurs or the boarding parties, and putting those at the top of your opponent's deck just lets them cascade again, and that doesn't seem very good. And also the creature you probably you probably don't want to do it to this creature, but you couldn't anyway, is the Writhing Chrysalis. And, despite that being red and green to cast, it has Devoid as well. So it actually has no color. So you wouldn't be able to hit that. And you probably wouldn't want to anyway, because then they'd be able to cast it and get the cast trigger again too. So I don't know what this really hits in Pauper that is going to help you out. I think it probably just ends up helping your opponent too much. And overall, it's just an overcosted tempo piece. I don't really like this at all. I really don't. The art's cool though. I do want to point that out, but the rest of the card pretty bad. I will give it a 2.3. Naiad of Hidden Coves is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 enchantment creature nymph. During turns other than yours, spells cost 1 generic less to cast. That's okay. 3 mana for this, though, might be a little too much. Now, it does say spells, so if you have flash creatures or flash artifacts, things like that, that can also work, but we're mostly talking about instants here. And in that case, I might rather just want the... what's it called? There's a fairy in Foundations that just makes your instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. And I think I'd probably like that a little better. That's a flyer and does get you the cost reduction. That sees no play either. I'm not saying that that's a better card because it's in so many other decks. Like, that doesn't see play. It might actually be an uncommon, so that's maybe why it doesn't see play. But I don't... we have some cost reducers that are really good in Pauper. And I don't know if this is one of them. I think maybe the most interesting part about this card is that it is an enchantment itself, so it can potentially work in some other enchantment style decks that way. But now you're also really mixing things. Like, if I'm playing this card to be an enchantment because I have an enchantment based deck, then its effect is Again, mostly really only working with instants or creatures or artifacts, or I guess even enchantments with flash, but there aren't a whole lot of enchantments with flash and even fewer in the Pauper format. So I I get it. I see what it's doing. I think this is probably a really cool commander card if you build your deck in a very specific way. But I don't know if Pauper really allows you to build your deck in a specific way and puts you in a position to play this on a turn 3, because it doesn't really do anything on turn 3. Because if you've tapped out to play this card, you don't even have mana to cast on your opponent's turns. And then maybe they take this out. Yeah, I have some real reservations about this card. It is still a cost reducer. It can still probably save you a good chunk of mana over the course of a game, but I think there's enough hoops from the deck building perspective and from the playing it in a game perspective that I don't particularly like it. I will give this thing a 2.7. All right, what do we got next? It's Fairy Duelist, 1 and a blue for a 1/2 Fairy Rogue with flash and flying. And when this creature enters, target creature and opponent controls get -2, -0 until end of turn. This isn't bad. Problem is, we just have some other cards that do this slightly better. And one is Humbling Elder. And then we've got another card that basically does the same thing. But this is a single mana that flash speed and gives the same kind of effect here. Now, this doesn't fly, and that's a big deal. You know, if you're going for ninjutsu stuff, Fairy Duelist might be a pretty useful card in that way. But I think once we've gotten effects like Humbling Elder and the other one that I'm not thinking of, but does essentially the same thing. When we've got these effects that only cost 1, you probably don't end up playing the one that costs 2. Those mono blue fairy decks just are efficiency monsters. Like, they are all about playing the most efficient cards possible, and I think that ends up taking Fairy Duelist out of the fairies deck for the most part. I could still see it seeing play. It probably has seen some play, but I think we're at a point where we just have cards that have eclipsed it just slightly. I will still give this thing a 3.7. I think it's pretty solid. Loran's Escape, single white mana for an instant. Target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and you scry 1. I think this is a very solid protection spell. We have some other cards that people use instead. There's the Phyrexian mana one that being Phyrexian mana can be cheaper to cast, and that gives protection instead of indestructible and hexproof. And protection from a color can be used offensively and defensively in a way that hexproof and indestructible less so. You're mostly only using that for defensive capabilities. Now, if you have a creature that's swinging in, and now you also make it indestructible to, stay alive even during the attack, I guess that is kind of using it offensively, but it's still being defensive on the creature. But hexproof and indestructible are a good mix of abilities that are going to keep your creature or artifact alive when you play this. And I do really like that it can target an artifact as well as a creature. That I don't know how many artifacts you really care to save in Pauper, but I do like that this card just goes, yeah, let's cover that. Let's cover that card type as well, just to potentially save something there. Scry 1's not bad. Just I could even see in like real desperation mode, maybe you just play this at the end of your opponent's turn to just get the scry off if you're in a really bad spot. But for the most part, I think you just have this card that is going to be generically useful in a variety of situations, and that's not bad. That's not bad. I'm going to give this thing a 4.1. I really do think it is that good. One of the better white protection spells in the game, and I think one of the better protection spells in the Pauper format. Flood of Recollection is blue for a sorcery. Return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and then you exile Flood of Recollection. That's kind of interesting. Blue decks, thinking like the Mono Blue Terror and stuff like that, have plenty of mill effects that are putting cards into your graveyard. Those decks usually want to keep them in their graveyard because they want to use the cost reduction on Tolarian Terror and things like that to play those cards. But if you go outside of Mono Blue Terror and you think about other decks that are playing some instants and sorceries and would really appreciate getting them back, this seems like a pretty good card to do so. Now, it is sorcery speed, and it does exile itself, so you get to play this once and it's gone. And it is double blue, so it does require you to be pretty blue heavy. And that's kind of a bummer, because I think the cards I'm thinking that I'd really want to get back are things like a Scred or a Cast Down or something like that, which means, that it's going to be harder to be able to cast both of those things when this thing is costing 2 blue and those other cards are red and black respectively. So I don't know. Plus, you have Archaeomancer in blue already, and you can do plenty of things by blinking and bouncing that, and that gets you a repeatable effect that this can't possibly go up against. You get the loops with Ephemerate and things like that, and this card will never be able to do something like that. But it does cost cheaper than an Archaeomancer, so it's a consideration. But I think it's a consideration most people have considered and have decided that it's not worth their time like some other cards are. I'll still end up giving this thing a 3.2. There's some meat on its bones, but not really enough to justify. Hog Monkey is 2 and a black for a 3/2 boar monkey. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control get with a +1/+1 counter. Ooh. Why don't I take that from the top? At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it gains menace until end of turn, and it also has exhaust for 5. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. I think Hog Monkey is kind of interesting. Like, it is. We see plenty of cards that say, hey, creatures with +1/+1 counters on them have flying or lifelink or trample. Most of those aren't in the Pauper format. I think maybe there's one that says creatures with +1/+1 counters have trample. That's a common. But this guy gives one creature and one creature only menace, and that creature has to have +1/+1 counters on it, which is jumping through a couple of hoops. He has a way to give himself +1/+1 counters, so this guy gets up to a 5/4 who can have menace. You got to pay 8 mana to do that, but I don't know, a 3 mana 3/2 3 mana 3/2. If you have another way of getting +1/+1 counters on this guy or another guy, you're getting good value from the menace each turn. This is also it doesn't give your maybe I'm the one who's exhausted. It's a creature with a +1/+1 counter. It doesn't give +1/+1. What am I doing? It's okay. It's okay. But I think it's enough hoops that you're not really going to bother. And Menace is good, but it's not incredible. It's not hugely game winning. It can make a difference, but it's fun to say Hog Monkey. What can I say? That's the reason. That's the reason I think anyone would be excited about playing this card. The effects are, kind of secondary to the whole exercise. Let's go with a 2.4, I guess. And let's get on to our last card. Obviously I'm not doing too great at this. I'm feeling it. We will end with Drift of Phantasms. This is a card I love. 2 and a blue for a 0/5 spirit with Defender and Flying, and Transmute for 1 and double blue. So when you pay 1 and double blue and discard this card, you can search your library for a card with the same mana value as this card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. You can do that only at sorcery speed. So on one hand, this card is kind of bad. It's a 3 mana 0/5 wall and that flies. So it does block flyers. That is not great. Not great. Sure, you can block a lot of things in the air, but that's about it. The reason this card is good is the transmutability, and that is kind of, what you can say about most of the cards with transmute is that, hey, it's got transmute. Isn't that good enough? This is a tutor for any 3-mana thing in your deck. Would you pay 3 mana, 1 in double blue, to go find the best 3-drop in your deck? Yeah, you would. And man, this is a pretty darn solid card to do that. And the card itself can be usable. I think it does get used, maybe a copy or two in the not Turbo Fog, but like there is like a Walls deck in Pauper. I think that deck is mostly green. Maybe it's Bant, like a little bit of Bant here and there. That is not my preferred way of playing Pauper. I don't know all the cards available to it or that get played in those decks. But Drift of Phantasms is a card that I played with a lot in Ravnica City of Guilds when it first came out. It's a card that I play in some commander decks because being able to search for any 3-drop in a commander deck is really good. The transmute cards are cool. They're too powerful, and I think Wizards learned that, and they don't make many transmute cards these days. But man, we got a handful of them from the first Ravnica set, and those have turned out to be pretty darn solid. We see some other cards. Let me the other one I can think of off the top of my head is Shred Memory, also from Ravnica, but it's a 2-mana that has transmute. Now, when you're paying the 3 transmute here, you're still looking for a card with the same mana value, so you are still looking for a 2-drop. But paying 3 mana for your best paying 3 mana for your best 2-drop is also a pretty darn solid thing you can do in any format, Pauper or Commander or whatever else. But finding a 3-drop for 3 is just damn good. Just damn good. I'll give this card I think, I cannot be sure. Correct me in the comments if you must. But I think this does at least go in the Walls deck in Pauper. So I'm going to end up giving this thing a 5.3. God, maybe it should go higher. Yeah, I think it should go higher. When you're just a tutor on a stick, I'm going to go 5.8. 5.8 on that. Drift of Phantasms, it was really good to see you. Thank you for bringing my spirits up after I was obviously struggling. And hey, it's a spirit itself. So look at that. All right, that's enough out of me. We will catch you on the next one. See ya.